Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Summer Bridge. I'm Dr. Razzan Zahra here with my sister Reem Zahra, Dr. Reem Zahra, and this is Snowball, and she is with Jordan. Welcome, everybody, to the Summer Bridge.
Hi, everyone. We're very excited to be here. It's our third year teaching in Summer Bridge. Razzan and I are both professors of English at Sonoma State University, but we want to share a little background with you because we're both first-generation immigrants, and we came, oh, there's Snowball. We weren't sure she was taking a nap. We came from Damascus, Syria. I'll show you a map here for those of you who don't know it. It's overseas, and it's in the Middle East. And unfortunately, Syria has been war-torn for the past 9 years with the civil war. So we're talking about today the poetry you're assigned to read in the module. It deals a lot with immigrants and refugees, and a lot of refugees. There's a lot of refugees in Syria that have come out of the civil war. We graduated from Sonoma State in 2003, and then went on to do our doctorate degree at UC Davis. But throughout this time, we had a very intense passion for poetry, and we want to share that story with you because it began really at Sonoma State University with the very first class we took at Sonoma State, where we had to do a presentation on a woman author. And we chose the woman author, Razzan. She is from Syria, and she has a dual citizenship from Lebanon as well. And she writes about the war that took place in Lebanon. It was a 15-year war. And so we translated her poetry for the presentation. And the professor asked us, you can go, Jordan. The professor asked us why we didn't use any other translation in English, and we told her the reason being is that there wasn't any. And so she says, well, this is your mission. This is what you got to do. This is what you came here to do. You're both bilingual. You know Arabic and English, and you've done a beautiful job with this translation. So you should just continue doing it if nobody's translated her book. So it was quite a journey. We started learning about poetry and writing poetry, published in a journal, Zom, which I think you all want to know about. And then we were working on the translation while teaching Arabic at Sonoma State. And our students were wonderful people who gave us feedback on the translation and how they felt about reading it as a second language. But Zom is a journal at Sonoma State that you should consider publishing your poetry in. And while we were doing our doctorate, we published our first translation by Razzan, and that's Razzan. We've become very good friends with her. She's an amazing, amazing woman. And she has our book there. She gave us permission to do the translation. And last year, we came out with our second poetry book.
Very excited about it.
A translation by her. So it's just been, if you think about it, it's been 20 plus years. And so the reason we share this story with you is because at Sonoma State, most professors, we as professors of English, want to encourage our students to explore and to find what ignites them, what ignites their passion and desire, just like we had that experience ourselves. And you know, so you never know, you know, when you're on this journey of learning and education, you never know who you'll meet or what subjects you'll encounter that you will come back to or carry forth. Because, you know, this has been the first class that we took in 1999, and it's been 20 plus years that we have been pursuing this project because it was something we're passionate about. So for you, it may end up being something completely different. But I guess we're inviting you to be open to the possibilities, because this is what education is. It's giving you windows onto the world, and you know, for you to discover your passion.
And creativity. And as we're going to talk about some of the books that you was assigned to and some of the poems, and we hope that this will ignite your creativity, imagination. So are you all ready? So that we're going to start with the art and function of poetry. That's the idea that you've been exploring, and maybe read some of the poems in the modules. So the first idea I want to just get to you is, we've been talking about poetry. We talked about the book. So what is poetry? You might already be familiar with the term, but just in case, I'm going to quickly go over it. Poetry does not use paragraphs. It uses stanzas. It's usually condensed language. So you could make a one-line poetry. Also, something very important in poetry is the poetic devices. These are your colors and paintbrushes that you use when making your work of art. So some of the poetic devices we're going to be talking about are metaphor, simile, personification, and repetition of words. But we're going to focus, of course, on metaphors and simile. Again, one more last thing, that when you're doing your poetry or writing poetry or reading, remember, there's free association. You are free to put commas where you want to, capital letters. The most important thing is the reader's intention and purpose from writing the poem. And the most important thing is, when you're reading any poem, what emotion does it wake in you? What ideas and creativity does it ignite within your imagination? So, the next slide.
So part of what you're doing with the readings that you're assigned with Ink Knows No Borders, you will see the poets addressing issues of oppression, racism, and the challenges, and challenging really the idea of geographical boundaries. And this is a very timely subject, especially with what has happened with George Floyd and the protests going on, as well as what's been happening really for a while. And so these poets are not shy about addressing issues of racism, addressing how they feel and the sense of oppression they feel, but they also want to take time to try and honor, some of them, their ancestors. So you'll see that a lot of the rules that we may have about language are being broken, but they're broken with a particular intention. So it's creativity with intention. One of the poets, Jeff Coomer, really takes is a good example of him honoring his grandfather in his poem In a History Lesson, where he shows us that his grandfather sacrificed his life and worked hard so that it can be better for the next generation. And we totally resonate with that, because when we do our translations, we did a dedication as well to our ancestors, because the sacrifices they made, any fights and struggles that they made, somehow, even if we don't know all of those struggles, they paved the way for us to become educated, to get our degrees, and to get our doctorates. And so he's doing something similar, because at the end of the poem, he asks his grandfather, so what was it like, did you enjoy working in the mines? And his grandfather looks at him and says, like has nothing to do with it. And what we read that to be was that it's about sacrificing so that your father and you can get a better life. And so what they're doing here, what these poets are doing, is also trying to humanize immigrants. They're trying to humanize the refugees as well, because when we otherize someone, and this is very key in the idea of racism, when you otherize someone and don't think of them as human, you are so much likely to be violent and judgmental and even kill them, as we're seeing. And so they're trying to show that those are human beings. They have experiences, they have dreams, they have aspirations. And so keep that in mind when you're reading the poetry. So it brings up, this idea brings up the question, so is poetry just something that's an act of creativity, or it just, like a painting? that you're just doing for your own pleasure and for other people's pleasure? Or is poetry have a social purpose or a function? And in fact, poets are educators. Poets have a social duty and a moral purpose, and that's to effect social change. So they are educators, really. So Craig Santos Perez educates us about off-island, in his poem Off-Island Chamorros, educates us about the Chamorro people, and he uses conversations, maps, statistics, and demographics. All of those serve our factual information to get his readers to understand who the Chamorros are and where they come from, and also to explain to us this idea of what it feels like to be foreign in your own homeland. I want you to pause the videotape here, or the video here, and you want to look at the undocumented joy, because we'll walk you through some of the ways to read a poem. Like, how do we take the time to read and understand a poem? And one of the first things that you want to look at is structure. So how is the poem arranged, and the stanzas that it works with? What are the messages, in terms of it being visually appealing or shocking or uncomfortable? Razzan, do you want to talk about the undocumented joy, you, Samir?
And it starts with a single line. Oh, it says, "I do not remember crossing." That is the first line in a poem. So can a poem be one single line? Can a stanza be one single line? And the answer is absolutely yes. Do you need to include any punctuation? Not really, because if you look at the poem, the only punctuation he has is that it ends with the word or the period "now." And also, you keep in mind that if you're reading the undocumented joy, it varies from stanza to stanza. Look at the structure. He starts with one line, "I do not remember crossing." He goes to the next line, "I cannot tell you about the journey. Sometimes I close my eyes and I imagine a pitch black sky with 1,000 little stars." So now you have 3 to 4 lines, and then he goes back, "Imagine a poetic crossing." So you have 1 line, 4 lines, and 3 lines. That is a structure, and he ends the poem with "now," and with a period, as if to indicate it is finished. That's the end. I am here now. So just remember that. So most important thing when you're thinking about poem, remember structure.
And then the next layer of meaning, the next layer of interpreting a poem is also looking at the meaning. What is the author's intention? What is he trying to document? The poem is entitled Undocumented Joy. And like Razzan was saying, he's trying to say that I am here now. He's asserting his resilience. And that's why the period comes in at the very end. But in the meaning, what is the emerging theme there? And so him not remembering crossing begins to tell us that he's addressing childhood trauma, right? I don't remember crossing. And it happens a lot when when children have particularly traumas, they may not remember them because they suppress them. But he has, some kind of remembrances, very few sensorial things that he remembers, right? Like winds and someone, Abula, tugging at his hands. And we realize, is this true that, he crossed without the trauma? And we realize that no, he's told that they were stuffed under a back seat of a car. So you can imagine now the poem, all the images that he addresses and talks about, everything makes sense now as to why he's trying to remember. So as the next level, Razzan?
What the most important thing is to think about is I cannot have a structure and a theme without language. Now, language is very important, so I want you to think about, he used certain words, the diction. repetition of words. Are there certain words that when you look at the poem, he is repeating? And some of the words that you may see him repeating is, I wish, what does he wish for? I can only tell you about. So when you're reading the other poems or you're thinking about poetry, think about repetition, think about themes, and think about structure. Because without those three things, the poem cannot stand on its own and it will not ignite the creativity as it should.
So we're going to take a minute with language. Some of the tools that you can use for interpreting language are some key poetic devices. There are many, but we're only going to cover a few here. So the first being metaphor.
Okay, you might have known the term. If not, bear with me as I define it, and you may want to write it down. If you're like me, if you write something down, you remember it. Take notes now. This is a very important term when you even want to analyze anything, especially English. So remember this idea of poetry. The key word is metaphor, refers to a figure of speech that makes a comparison by directly relating one thing to another unrelated thing. So metaphor is relating one thing to another that's unrelated. Unlike similarly, metaphors do not use words such as like or as to make a comparison. So everybody wrote metaphor. This is awesome. Let's move to the next part now. Always remember, you define the terms and then give example. The best example is immigrant. You may want to hit the, again, pause button here and read the poem a little bit, but just bear with us because I'm just going to go into the metaphor as an example. I'm not going to talk about theme and structure now, but look at the one that's highlighted in red. It's called On the Magic Carpet of our navy blue U.S. port that carries us to safety and no bombs. So when you're thinking about the magic carpet, first of all, you're thinking, oh, this is an escape. We are driving away because we can leave on the magic carpet. This is a metaphor. They're comparing leaving, departure with magic. What emotions does it ignite? What does it tell us? We think there's escape to a beautiful place, but the question is that comes next is why? Why do they want to escape what's going on? You know now there may be an experience of immigration, they may be refugees because there's bombing, so you get to safety and no bombs. You see how she's walking us through. And the rest of the poem, you have the idea of, oh, now I'm going to a place where there's safety, no bombs, to a place where the planes are made and the place where the president will make the call to send the planes into my storybook childhood. She uses a beautiful imagery of storybook childhood. She does not say, Tufaha does not say, oh, I want to go back to my childhood home, that uses the imagery storybook childhood again to invoke emotions of everything that I know in my past now is slipping away, but I still feel guilty because I've left everybody that I know. My neighbors have become now refugees. So do you see that in one poem, she gave you the theme. She talked about metaphor and also included imagery. Do we see any similes? Not in this poem. Why? Because there's no like or as, okay? So
And,
now the next,
oh, and metaphor is usually stronger because it prepares you for something that's unexpected and more shocking. So it's a lot stronger. And also remember, if you can take a word out, you take a word out.
and now we're gonna go into imagery, I think.
So with imagery, you know, like you had here with my storybook childhood, one of your assignments is to write a poem, and even when you're thinking about it, imagery provides us with a sensorial experience, and this is the magic of poetry, is to awaken our senses and to get us to connect with life or with an experience beyond just our intellect, like science would, but to get us to also feel it in our body and in our hearts. So oftentimes what poets do is they say, or they relay the experience of how does it feel in my body, right? So one of the poems here is very good example on Samira Ahmad being American. And she's addressing the way her childhood innocence is shattered when she experiences racism for the first time. And so she uses the pronoun you to get the reader to to feel her experience. You're 7 years old when a grown man screams at you, spitting knives, from crooked purple lips. Go home, fucking Packy. You're confused because the ethnic slur is inaccurate. So here, if she had said, began with, you're confused right away, or I was confused because someone just said this, without using this image, spitting knives, it wouldn't have really gotten us to feel like this visceral experience of what it felt like to her. It was like a knife. This is how it felt like in her body. So when you're working on writing your poem for this assignment, you want to try to say what images does this bring to my mind, and how does it feel in my body, and then use images, right, that will help the reader experience what you're feeling and transport them into the world that you want to transport them into. And in her case, in Ahmad's case, it's to transport them into what it feels like to experience racism. All right, so next one is simile.
Okay, the next one, we're going to move on. We talked about metaphor. I touched a little bit about simile, but I'm going to touch upon it a little bit. Remember, it does not use like or as, and remember we said it's stronger. Again, it's comparing two things, but it uses like or as. So let me give you an example. And I touched on it. Ethnic study is like a free study abroad program. Did everybody see the like a free study abroad program? Now we immediately know this is not a metaphor, but a simile. Okay, so that's the first thing I want you to remember. So, and also, she had a simile, and to compare a broad program to ethnic study, to make you think there's something not totally correct with ethnic study. How do we know that? Because she uses the word free. Okay, that's very important. Why does she do that? Because to create the imagery, as Reem was talking about imagery, the sensory image, free. Is there anything free in life? Not really. So how can this be free? Something is not totally correct. That does not require that they bring their luggage with them. So she's trying to tell us, well, you know what? We got to think about, ethnic studies. We got to think how it is talking about racial profiling. And then as the poem goes on a little bit, and I want you to look at the next part, is that she uses, I'm just going to go to the very last line because she uses a very shocking image. Ask me what it's like to have your skin be made, and she's talking about racial profiling here, made to feel like the nuclear missile we are all know is coming. Again, we see the word like, we know it's simile, but then she uses this shocking image of a nuclear missile.
And then another thing in the poem that she's trying to illustrate is this kind of divide between intellectualizing something, intellectualizing, being Black, and then actually experiencing and feeling it. And so what she's trying to get across is to try and also close that divide. And just to say, it doesn't make her poem any weaker by using like. Here it makes more sense in those instances for her to use like, because it would sound awkward if she says ethnic studies is a free study abroad program, right? So it's more appropriate to keep that word in. And with this, we hope we've given you a bit of an idea about how to write poetry. So now it's your turn to go into the module section of Write It and work on the exercise there. And have the courage to speak your truth and to tell your story, as Teresa Siagatanu says, who's the poet in ethnic studies. She says, write a poem where every line begins with the words, I am here because. Of course, you don't have to do that, but the idea is tell your story, because if you don't tell your story, nobody else will.
And thank you for being part of the Summer Bridge. Go Summer Bridge. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye. Thanks for listening.